Hey guys, Tammy here. And in this video, we're going to talk about, are we putting our children in the middle? And I find a lot of times people don't even know they're doing this. They think that they aren't doing it when in actuality, they are. A lot of times somebody will say to me something like, well, the child brought it up. And, here's what I want to tell you. If the child brings it up, you need to close that window, because any discussion that you're having about what's going on in the other parent's world or what their experience is in the other parent's world, it puts that child in a loyalty bind. There's really no good answer to this other than closing the window and distracting. That's what I always say, like shut the conversation down and distract. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples in this video. So I can remember one of my stepsons when he was younger, I would say about 12. He came into the room and he looked at me, and it was just me in the room. His dad wasn't in there with me. And he looked at me and he said, Tammy, why is mommy so mad at you guys? And that's one of those perfect openings for you to go, well, why? What did mommy say? What happened? And I knew what had happened because unbeknownst to him, mom had filed a court action and had served us with it. And so I knew what was going on in the background, but he didn't know. And, you really want to be careful, because a lot of times you start assuming that the child has been told things or knows something that they don't know. And I've seen parents kind of accidentally let out even more details than they should, and, with the child already like knowing something was going on, but not really knowing what. I don't want to confirm for him, oh yeah, we're in court, there's all these things or whatever. And so when he said to me, why is mom so mad at you guys? I just said, honey, I'm not real sure, but you know what? We both love you and everything is going to be fine. It's all going to work out. And he promptly just said, okay. And he got up and walked out of the room and went back to what he was doing. And I try to impress upon people that what children are almost always looking for is reassurance that everything's okay. That's what they want from us. That's what they're looking for from their parents is everything going to be okay? Now, when they're a little older, they may ask more questions and say more things, when they get into those teen years and they're a little more aware. But at, I would say 11, 12 and under, really the main thing I find they're looking for is reassurance. And what happens is, it's hard to teach children in this situation that our homes are private, right? If we have a nuclear family and it's mom, dad, and the kids, if you grew up for any length of time in a home with your parents, you know that what happens in your home is private, right? It's your private space to relax and do what you want. And whether you burp at the dining room table or you eat ice cream at midnight or whatever you're doing, you don't necessarily want the whole rest of the world to know about that, right? This is our safe space when we're at home. I think this is a difficult concept for kids a lot of times when they start going back and forth between two households at a particularly young age. And so what they do is they overshare about things going on in the home. And then if our reaction to that is to try to peel the onion layers back more, right, or dig deeper with the shovel, then we're effectively putting them in the middle in that situation, even though that may not be our intent with it. One time my stepson came and he walked into the living room. And, let me give you a little context for this story before I share the rest of it. My late husband, Thomas, and his ex-wife had been an infertile couple. And so, they had gone through all the IVF and, all the emotional and ups and downs. And, is she pregnant? Is she not pregnant? Can she get pregnant? All the testing of everybody, all of that stuff. I, praise the Lord, never had to go through anything like that. I was able to get pregnant with my ex-husband just looking at me. But if you've been through infertility issues, you know how painful that can be for people who really, really want a child and are struggling. And Thomas was, later in life in his 40s when his children were born. And, part of it is his first wife died of breast cancer. And then him and his second wife were infertile and tried for several years to have a baby. And so they thought the issue was Thomas. Was his ex-wife. They thought that the problem was her and her eggs. And so they moved on to adoption and they adopted the two little boys. Well, turns out it was Thomas. It wasn't her. But they didn't know that until they each got with new partners. And, we figured out pretty quickly that Thomas was infertile. And thank goodness. I liked that because I didn't want any more kids. So it was no big deal to me. But his ex-wife got, remarried, and her husband had two children. So she was able to get pregnant by her second husband, even though she hadn't been able to do that with Thomas. And so she had one child. And so we had learned of that. And it was a little bit traumatic for Thomas learning that, she had a baby and been able to do that. I think it sort of always kind of sat with him. But anyway, so his son had been with mom all day, and he comes walking in, and he walks right into the living room, right where me and Thomas are sitting. As soon as he comes to the door, beeline to the living room, and he looks at Thomas and he says, "There's another baby in mommy's belly, but she told me not to tell you." So, and the reason his ex-wife had told him, and the child was only about 4 or 5 at the time. And the reason mom had told him not to tell is because, one, she wasn't very far along in the pregnancy yet, right? And she had still struggled with some miscarriage and getting pregnant and all that kind of thing. So she wasn't ready for the whole world to know. And I think the second thing was, she was trying to be sensitive, I think, in her own way to the situation with Thomas and them struggling with the IVF and going through all these things. And so that is a perfect example of where you could start to question the child. Really? Well, how do you know? Well, what makes you think there's a baby in mom's belly? Well, blah, blah, blah. Anything we ask him is asking him to divulge private information from the other world, things that she has entitled to a right of privacy over. And so when he blurted this out, Thomas looked at him and said, "If mom told you not to tell me, then why are you telling me?" And the child just kind of froze. And so in that moment, Thomas was able to reinforce, one, that that the child's mother deserves privacy, that his ex-wife deserves some privacy around something she had asked for privacy around. And number two, that he needed to learn that Thomas supported his mother's position, right? That reinforcement of supporting the other person's parenting, that was effectively what Thomas was doing in his response to the child. The interesting part of this is I started to try to figure out, okay, how are we going to teach these children about privacy in each world? For my kids, it was a little bit different. They were 11 and 15 when the divorce happened. They had lived in the house with me and their dad. They had that private world. And so when me and their dad broke into two separate homes, I didn't really have to have a conversation about that. It was just kind of the natural order of things. And they were old enough to kind of, I think, pick up on that and understand it and know, okay, well, what happens in mom's world stays in mom's world, and what happens in dad's world stays in dad's world. But because Thomas's children had two homes and went back and forth 50-50, they didn't really have this concept of privacy. I sat down and had a conversation with them, and I will never forget it. And little boys think all things about bodily functions are hysterical, right? So I remember one night, a couple nights later, we were sitting at the dining room table, and I said to one of them, you know how when we're in our own house and we burp or we fart or we do something like that, like when we go out to the grocery store, we don't share those things with other people, right? No matter which one of us it was, whether it was me, dad, one of you guys, whoever, that's something private that happens at our home that we don't go share outside the home, right? And they understood that and they said yes. And I said, okay, well, there's certain things that you get to experience that are private in our home when you're here with us. And there's certain things you get to experience that are private in mom's home when you're with her. And so both of those homes are entitled to privacy of the things that happen within the home. Now, I think there is a balance to this because you want children to know that it's safe for them that they should always tell something that someone is hurting them, or abusing them in some way or something like that. And so I think you have to, have a little deeper conversation about it and explain those things to the child. But I think that starting to set that line of privacy, especially when you believe the other parent is essentially a safe parent. When you think they're not on drugs, they're not driving drunk with the child, they're not beating them, nobody's being sexually molested. There's none of those kind of red flag issues that we talk about. I think it's real important in that context, especially to reinforce for the children that not only are you entitled to privacy in your world, but you also support the other parent having that privacy in their world. And honestly, let's face it, a lot of times the more we know, the more upsetting it can be. Just like with this situation with Thomas, it's like, of course, he's going to have to find out about the child eventually, but it's an upsetting thing. And I think that she wanted the opportunity to, tell him herself face to face because of the history of what they had been through. I think explaining those things to the children and helping them understand that helps keep them out of the middle, because then they don't come in blurting things that then we've got to respond to or deal with or feel like we need to respond to or deal with. But the best thing that you can do for the child is to really try to shut those conversations down, reassure them that everything is fine, and help them be able to just move on. I hope this video was helpful. I hope that you're, really consciously taking steps not to put your kids in the middle. Honestly, the stress and the anxiety that I see on children a lot of times comes from these situations where they are put in the middle. And honestly, even if you don't care one whit about your ex, you don't want your children to develop anxiety and stress and those types of, mental health conditions as a result of the pressure from being put in the middle from each side from the parents. If you would like to learn more about my coaching services, please go to divorceuniversityonline.com/VIP-coaching. There's a link on there where you can schedule a free strategy session with me. I'd love to talk to you and learn more about your situation. Thanks so much. I'll see you in the next video.